So we're looking at 1 Samuel, and what we're going to look at is the authorship of it, the date when it was written, what time period it covers, background to it, the type of genre it is, the main characters involved, the structure of the book, the themes throughout the book, and then we're going to look at hermeneutics, that word again, for reading the book. So start off with authorship. Probably know this. Originally, there was one book and it included 1st and 2nd Samuel, but it got split in half, probably because it would have been a big book to carry around. They didn't have nice thin paper in those days. So if you had Samuel, you'd be walking around like this. So it got chopped in two. So really, we should look at Samuel as a whole, but there's so much information to look at. We're just going to look at 1 Samuel today, okay, the first half of it. Now, the author of it is not known. We don't actually know who wrote Samuel. You might think that's a bit funny, isn't it, Samuel? But it's one of those books where we give it a name, but we don't necessarily know that the name is of the author. But Samuel is a major player in the book. Now, one of the reasons why we don't think Samuel wrote the book, or at least not the whole thing, is that the book of Samuel records Samuel's death. Okay, so it just seems unlikely, yeah, that he would be dead and then writing about what happened when he died. And then there's actually another, here it is, 1 Samuel 25, verse 1, it says, "Now Samuel died." And there's a bit of description about that. And then there's still 7 chapters left of the book. So it's just hard to imagine that Samuel was able to write the following 7 chapters, okay? But there's a theory that maybe Samuel and another prophet called Nathan and Gad wrote Samuel. This is possible because we know these guys took notes, right? Check this out. 1 Samuel 10:25, it says, "Then Samuel told the people the rights and duties of the kingship, and he wrote them in a book and laid it up before the Lord." So we know that Samuel was in the habit of writing stuff down. He tells the people a message about the king, then he writes it down. So he's a note taker. So maybe his notes were used to write Samuel. Also, we see in 1 Chronicles 29:29, it says, "Now the acts of King David, from first to last, are written in the Chronicles of Samuel the seer, and in the Chronicles of Nathan the prophet, and in the Chronicles of Gad the seer." So we've got all these guys that are writing stuff about David. So maybe their stuff was used to write the book of Samuel. Now, let's talk about the date. We know this book wasn't written before 970 BC. Okay, it wasn't written before then because it describes the death of David. It says in 2 Samuel 23 verse 1, "Now these are the last words of David." And David died about 970 BC. So it couldn't have been written before then, okay? And the time period that the book covers is about 100-year period, right? From 1050 BC to 950 BC, okay? Notice the dates work backwards in BC. This is 1050 years before Christ. This is 950 years before Christ. So even though 950 is a smaller number, it's actually later on in time. I know it can throw you sometimes when you see a BC date. So, let's look at the background to the book. At the end of the book of Judges, Israel's in a bad way. You remember when we did the book of Judges? Pretty depressing. Yeah, exciting book, but well depressing, the state of Israel. At the end of this book, Israel is a collection of tribes that have little unity. It's hardly a nation. It's not a nation of Israel. It's loads of little tribes, right? And they're unable to defeat all their enemies, especially the Philistines, okay, which are sea people that come into play a lot in the 1 Samuel. Now, the question is, at the end of Judges, will Israel be better off with a king? You might remember that kept coming up in the book of Judges. They had no king. And you can see that the writer is hinting maybe Israel needs a king. Everyone's doing what's right in his own eyes, and maybe they need a king. Because the whole system of having judges, like Samson, is not really working. So maybe now they need a king. So that brings us to 1 Samuel, where for the first time ever, they have a king. But the reason why it's taken so long to have a king, when other nations around the time have got kings, is there was an initial resistance to having a king. We see this with Gideon, right? In Judges chapter 8:23, they asked Gideon to be their king. If you remember, Gideon's one of the judges. And Gideon says, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. So there's guys like Gideon that actually had this idea that, you know what, God is supposed to be your leader. Not me, not one man, not a king, but God. And so there was resistance to having a king, right? But at the same time, there was a prophecy of a king. God knew there was going to be a king. He prophesied it. Check it out. Deuteronomy 17. Notice, this is important. I'm reading now from the book of Deuteronomy. You'll see why this is important in a minute. Chapter 17, verse 14, it says, when you come to the land that the Lord your God has given you, and you possess it and dwell in it. Now, notice, this is before they're in the promised land, okay? This is before the book of Judges, okay? And they've come out of Egypt, and God's saying, when you go into that land and say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. So we can see that the other nations had kings, and God's prophesying that one day the people are going to say, now we're in our land, we want a king. Verse 15, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. So it's prophesied already, you guys are going to have a king. There's also instructions for the king that are laid out in this book. Notice, Deuteronomy, chapter 17, verse 18, just a few verses later than what we just read. It says, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law. So the king has to write a copy of the law, okay? And it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. So notice that way back in the book of Deuteronomy, the king, the future king, who didn't even exist yet, was given instructions of the right way of being king. He had to be going by God's law and obeying it, right? So that's the background to the book of Samuel. Now, the genre of Samuel, right, is narrative. It's telling a story. But it's got prose in it, and it's also got poetry. It's got both mixed in. And you'll notice at the beginning of the book, very close to the beginning, there's a song. Hannah's song, okay? She sings a song, and in this song, which you'll see written in your Bible in poetry form, like the lines won't go to the end of the line, the words won't go to the end of the line. In this, you'll see us singing about themes that are going to come up throughout Samuel. So as you read that song, start thinking about those themes and prepare yourself to hear those themes explained throughout the rest of the book. It's quite clever. The end ends with David's song, and it uses the same themes. Now, when I say the end, I'm talking about the end of 2 Samuel, okay, because it's one book. So you get a song at the beginning, you get a song at the end, and both of them talk about the same themes, and we'll look at those themes in a minute. What you also need to know about this genre is that it's theological history. Different to the way history books are written these days. This is theological history. In other words, it's history from God's perspective. So the way it's written isn't the way historians discuss things on the History Channel when they say, well, I think he did it because he was having emotional problems. And someone else says, I think it was the political situation. It's not like that. This is all from God's perspective, how he views history. So it's very enlightening for us to see what God thinks about the world today. You get an idea of how he sees things. It also reveals who God is and how he acts. So it's very different to the history books you would have read in school. One of the purposes of this is to reveal who God is and how he acts. It's not so much designed as a book that you just flip open one day and hope there's a verse there that will give you guidance, like some kind of magic book. It's not really designed like that. If God speaks to you through that, then that's amazing, and God can do that. Praise God. But mainly, you're supposed to read it and you get an understanding of who God is and how he acts. It's not just theological history, it's Deuteronomic history. Hope I said that right. It's one of those words you always get tongue-tied trying to say. It's history based on the book of Deuteronomy. Check this out. The Deuteronomic history goes from Joshua to Kings. Now, what book comes before Joshua? Yeah, some people actually reckon Deuteronomy should be split from the first 5 books of the Bible and put right before Joshua, going all the way to Kings as one section. Because the books from Joshua to Kings are all telling history with the perspective of what was laid out in the book of Deuteronomy, which is why I mentioned Deuteronomy earlier. Deuteronomic history applies the laws and worldview of the book of Deuteronomy to the history of Israel. I'll give you some examples of that. Firstly, Deuteronomy spoke of a future king and made principles for that. We've already seen this. Secondly, Deuteronomy spoke of a time when Israel would have rest from her enemies, and then God would choose a place for people to worship him in. In 1 Samuel, you see Israel having rest from enemies. 2 Samuel. And God choosing a place for people to worship him in. But this was laid out in the book of Deuteronomy. We also get Deuteronomy warning of blessings for those who obey and judgment for those who don't. And you see that in the book of Deuteronomy. Now let's look at the characters. You got Samuel, who's a prophet, and he's a good guy. You got Saul, who's the first king, and right from the beginning you can tell this guy ain't too cool. You know, he's found hiding amongst the baggage, isn't he? You know, when he's supposed to be announced as king, where is he? Oh, he's hiding over by the suitcases over there. You know, so you're kind of like, is this really the guy? Is this the king? So you get a few clues that Saul is not the ideal candidate. But then you get David. And David's this guy who manages to, you know, Saul avoids battle at times, and his son Jonathan sometimes ends up fighting when it should have been Saul. And Saul doesn't go out and fight Goliath. Then David comes along, this small guy, and he gets a sling with a stone. And apparently you could throw that stone at about 100 to 150 miles per hour. That's what the New Bible Dictionary says. And it goes straight into Goliath's head. So you're like, well, this looks like a good guy. David looks like a good guy. And what we see in the book of Samuel is the change in Israel from theocracy, which is where the people are led by God, to monarchy, which is the royalty, the royal family, which is institutionalized and hereditary. It's passed on through the children. So with these 3 characters, Samuel, Saul, and David, you see this transition happen. Now let's jump into the structure of 1 Samuel. 4 things. At the beginning of the book, right, when you start reading it, you'll see the time period before the monarchy, before there's any monarchy established. And you see in chapters 1 to 7, God rescuing his people. Doesn't look good at first. You've got the priests who are well dodgy. They're sleeping with women, right? These are the priests, okay? And it's dodgy. So you see, well, the priests aren't really helping us out, but then God helps them out. Then second part of the book, chapters 8 to 12, you see the beginning of the monarchy. And the reason why is because the people request it. They even demand it. They demand to have a king. Okay, and the monarchy starts. Third part, you see the people's choice is Saul. And you see how Saul's going on. And you see God reject Saul. Yeah, the people wanted him, but now we see God reject him. That's in chapters 13 to 15. And then lastly, you see God's choice. You see David. God chooses David, and that's chapters 16 to 31. Now let me just break down these 4 sections real quick. In the first section, first 3 chapters, you got God's man, Samuel. This outline I've taken from the Reformation Study Bible, by the way. So God's man, Samuel, chapters 1 to 3, right? Then you've got God's power, right? Where you see God's power demonstrated with the ark. You remember the ark, right? The Philistines managed to get hold of the ark, and all kinds of crazy stuff happens. And you learn a lot about God's power. You also learn here that the ark can't be used as a magic talisman. You can't just say, we're going to take the ark out somewhere and then we're going to be victorious. Doesn't work like that. But you also see in this bit what appears to be a bubonic plague happen, which is quite interesting. Now, thirdly, you see God's victory. You see Samuel versus the Philistines, chapter 7. Right, this is before the monarchy, remember? And Samuel leads a kind of little revival, if you like, and then they beat the Philistines in battle. That's before the monarchy, and notice it's God who's saving them. But then when the monarchy begins in the next section, first thing you see in chapter 8 is God grants the people's request. They want a king. God says, okay, you can have a king. Next thing, chapters 9 to 11, you see Saul starting to rise up. Okay, the guy who's hiding behind the baggage, you start seeing him now do his thing and become king. And you see Samuel issue warnings about the monarchy in chapter 12. He warns the people about the monarchy. And that the fact that the narrator put it in you, the fact that the narrator put that in the book tells you, should be a warning to you that something's going to come up later where we see that having a king isn't too cool a move. Then you got the people's choice, the rejection of Saul. You see Saul fighting against the Philistines in chapter 13. You see Saul fighting against the Amalekites in chapter 15. And you see how he does things wrong, how he doesn't follow the way God told him to do things. God rejects him. Then you got God's choice of David. You see David rise up fighting Goliath, okay? And you see that everyone likes him, okay? But Saul doesn't. Chapter 16 to 18, he is the flavour of the month. Everyone loves him, but Saul doesn't like him. And then we see Saul seeking David's life, wanting to kill him. But then we see David protecting Saul's life. So Saul's going after David to kill him, and David actually protects him, you know, and does things like nick his spear, and then starts dissing the guy who should be protecting Saul, saying, you didn't do a very good job, look, I've got his spear, that kind of thing. But he refuses to kill Saul, because he views him as God's anointed. God's put him in place, so I'm not going to touch him. Which is interesting, because when the more you find out about David's life, the more you realise what a violent man he was. And then you see the way he managed to resist killing Saul. It's quite amazing. And then you see David hiding with the Philistines. He actually ends up going and living with the Philistines and hiding from Saul. And then we see Saul die at the end of 1 Samuel. So that's a breakdown of the book. Now let's look at the themes throughout the book. First off, you got the holiness of God. And remember I said you'd see these themes in the song at the beginning from Hannah, yeah? So 1 Samuel 2:2, she says, there is none holy like the Lord. There is none besides you. There is no rock like our God. So that's Hannah singing about the holiness of God. You'll see that in the book. Then you've got a reversal of fortune. That keeps going on throughout the book. And Hannah sings this. 1 Samuel 2:5. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread. So the people that had loads of money, loads of food, now they're hiring themselves out to try and get food. But those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7. So the woman who couldn't have any kids now has 7 kids. But she who has many children is forlorn. So in the song she sings about people's roles in life being totally reversed. And we see this with Eli and we see this with Saul. Both of these characters get rejected by God. Eli doesn't do too well, as we'll see later. Another theme is the sovereignty of God. Again, in Hannah's song, verses 6 to 8, she says, the Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. He raises up poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. So the picture we have here is God's in control. If you're rich, God makes that happen. If you're poor, God makes that happen. And it's interesting, if you watch old movies where there's battles in, you'll notice the guys saying, let's see what the gods do. That kind of talk. That was the way people would think. They would think the gods are in control of what's going to happen. You know, if they lost the battle, they might say, the gods were cruel to us today. You know, and we see in the Old Testament people thinking in a similar way, except they're viewing it as one God. You know, and they're saying God's in control. God can make you rich. God can make you poor. He can kill you. He can bring you back from the dead. God's in control. Very unpopular message these days. Here's another example of God's sovereignty. This might shock you. Okay? Especially because we know in the Bible, we read that God doesn't desire the death of people. But we're going to read something a bit different here, which suggests there's two wills of God. You know, he doesn't desire to kill people, but at the same time, we're going to see him now desire to kill someone. Look, 1 Samuel 2, verse 22. Now Eli was very old, and he kept hearing that all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who were serving at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So his sons are priests, right, at the tabernacle, and they're sleeping with women who are serving at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And he said to them, "Why do you do such things? I hear of your evil dealings from all the people." Then a bit later it says, "But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for it was the will of God to put them to death." That's a scary verse. Their dad comes to them and says, "Why are you doing this?" And it says that they wouldn't listen to him. Why? Because God willed to put them to death. God caused them to not listen to their dad's advice because he wanted to kill them. It's true that God desires to not kill people, but at the same time, there's times where God desires to kill someone. He's sovereign. There must be more than one will of God. You know, just like, I don't know if you know the story of William Churchill in World War II. Obviously, Churchill isn't God, so we can't push the analogy too far, but you know the decoding device they had? What was it called? Enigma. The Enigma machine. The Germans didn't know that we knew how to crack their code, did they? And Churchill found from cracking their code, not that he did it, but he got informed that they were planning to bomb, I think it was Coventry. Yeah, planning to bomb Coventry. So you know what he did? He did nothing. He wanted to save those people in Coventry. He wanted to warn them, evacuate. He desired to save them. He desired that none of them would die. But he also realized that if he evacuated Coventry, when the bombers went over, they'd see an empty city and the Germans would know that their code had been cracked. And they needed the Germans to not know that code was cracked so they could win the war. So Churchill had two wills. He had one will that wanted to save people in Coventry. He had another will that wanted to win the war. And there must be a similar thing. I say similar because I don't want to push it too far because, you know, you can't press an analogy too far because God is not Churchill. But it just shows how, even as humans, we can have two wills going on. I think that's what's going on with God. Now, another theme is the futility of trusting in human strength. 1 Samuel 2:9, second part of it, Hannah sings, "For not by might shall a man prevail." So she's singing that it's not by your own strength that a man does well. That's not a very popular message these days. We're told it's all down to us. She says, no, it's down to God. And you see that in the Psalms as well. David's saying he doesn't trust in his sword. Instead, he trusts in God. God's the one who's going to win his battles for him. Another theme is about the Lord's anointed one. In verse 10 it says, "The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed." And we see the anointed being a reference to King David, but also ultimately to Jesus Christ. We'll come on to that later. Now, next theme is divine deliverance. It's tied in a bit to not trusting in your own strength, right? There's this victory at Mizpah. 1 Samuel 7, verses 2 to 17. And what happens, this is what the victory is preceded by, okay? Samuel talks to the people. He tells them to put away foreign gods. So they go and put away their foreign gods, yeah? He doesn't say, you know what, carry on with all your idols and then God will save you. He says, put away your foreign gods. They do that. Then they have a fast. They're fasting. Then Samuel makes a burnt offering. Now this is followed by the Philistines being thrown into confusion. That's what it says in the story. They're thrown into confusion. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? The Philistines hear all the Israelites are at Mizpah. They say, let's go and destroy them. They turn up. They're going to fight, and suddenly they're thrown into confusion. Now, I don't know what that looked like, but I imagine suddenly the Philistines are killing one another and just getting all confused in their head. God can do that. That's one of the themes in Samuel. God controls who wins the battles. Now, it's interesting in London, when there's so much street violence going on, Who ultimately controls who wins a street fight? It's actually God. It's God. God is in control of who wins a battle. Now that means we should be more concerned about being right with God than about being tooled up, being able to protect ourselves or protect someone else. Our faith has mainly got to be in God. And the Philistines end up being subdued. Now this was a divine deliverance, because before they couldn't handle the Philistines. But now, because of the things they've done, turning to God, God's the one who wins the battle for them. Now there's also a tension going on in the book of Samuel, a tension between God's electing love and his justice. I think we talked about that a bit before in Judges. God chooses people like the Israelites and David. The question is, when he chooses the Israelites, does that mean no matter what they do, God will take care of them? What we find is that, on the other hand, if they sin, he punishes them. God punishes the Israelites and he punishes David. So being chosen by God doesn't mean you never get punished by God. We also see causes of God's rejection. 1 Samuel chapter 12 verse 14, it says, "If you hear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well." So it's down for the people and the king to follow God, then everything will go well. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king. Okay, so they're only going to be successful if they follow God. Now, another theme here, requesting God. I mentioned this earlier. 1 Samuel 1:20, "And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son." Now before she couldn't have children, but she prayed and God gave her a child. Again, we see God is sovereign. Throughout the Bible, God controls whether you can have babies or not. "And she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord." So we've got this thing going on, asking God, right? Then in chapter 12, verse 13, it says, "And now behold, the king whom you have chosen, for whom you have asked, behold, the Lord has set a king over you." It's that theme again, of people asking God for something. They ask God for a king. And in the introduction to the Old Testament, it says that Saul means the one requested. That's what his name means. That's a book I recommended to you guys before, Introduction to the Old Testament. So that's another theme going on. Last theme we're going to look at is irony. Check this out. Uriah is faithful. You know Uriah? Yeah, Bathsheba's man. He's faithful. Their king is unfaithful. Uriah refuses to sleep with his wife because he knows his men are in battle. It would be wrong for him to take a little holiday now and sleep with his wife. Unbeknown to him, the king has already slept with his wife, whilst the king took a holiday when he should have been going off to battle. Uriah gets killed going into battle. The king doesn't even bother going into battle. He stays at home and has a holiday and looks at naked women from his roof. So there's irony in this story. You know, the way it's written, the book of Samuel is very clever. Now, I mentioned it a minute ago about the Lord's anointed. What we see in Samuel is that David is a type of Jesus. There's aspects about David's life that are a type of Jesus. They point to what Jesus is going to be like. There's serious similarities going on there. You've got both of them being sanctioned by a prophet. Anyone know who sanctioned David? Which prophet it was? Samuel. Samuel, right? He was the guy who anointed David, started his ministry as king. Now, who was the prophet who started off Jesus' ministry, if you like? John the Baptist. Yeah, so that's the similarity there. Another one is that the Spirit of the Lord came upon them both. With David, it's 1 Samuel 16:13, "And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward." And then in Mark's Gospel 1:10, it says, "Immediately he saw the heavens being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove." When did that happen? At the baptism, yeah. Another thing you got is both of them are rejected by a jealous king. Which king rejects David? Saul, yeah. Check it out, 1 Samuel 18:9. "And Saul eyed David from that day on." And then what king was jealous of Jesus? Herod, yeah. Matthew 2:6. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under. Another thing that happens, both of them are warned to flee for their life. Anyone know who warns David to flee for his life? Jonathan, yeah. 1 Samuel 20:42, then Jonathan said to David, go in peace. It's when they do their archery business. And he needs to secretly tell David, you're right, my dad wants to kill you, you've got to go. And then, what about Jesus? It's not actually Jesus who gets warned to flee. It's Joseph, his stepdad. Matthew 2:13. Behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. Now, another thing that is a similarity between David and Jesus is they're both rejected by their own people. David, it's amazing how his own people are to him. He rescues the people of Keilah, right? Sorry, Keilah. He rescues these people, and yet later, in 1 Samuel 23:12, he's praying to God, and he says, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, they will surrender you. You know, so David, he's asking God guidance. You know, am I going to get done? Am I going to get betrayed by these guys? And God says yes. And yet these are people that David helped out earlier, rejected by his own people. Same happens to Jesus. John 19:15. They cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. They reject Jesus as their king. So, now we've done that, we're going to look at hermeneutics. Now, hermeneutics is the way that you interpret the text. So when you read the book of Samuel, how are you going to understand what point the Holy Spirit is making? How are you going to understand that? As you know, I don't hold to the view of just flip it open, try and find a verse there and be like, that's what I got to do today. I don't believe that's the way the book was written. I think especially if you think about scrolls, I mean, do you know what I mean? People weren't able to just flip it open, see where it lands. I mean, maybe you could get the scroll and whoosh, chuck it or something, I don't know, and then chuck a rock and see where it lands. But you're really supposed to read the book as a whole, and there's certain techniques you can use to see what is the human author here getting at. And remember, the human author here is actually the Holy Spirit is writing it at the same time. Strange mystery how that works, just like we don't understand exactly how God's sovereignty works with our responsibility. You know, God's in control of whether you win the battle or not, but at the same time you still fight and you still use techniques to try and win that battle. And so what we know is God ultimately is behind the Bible being written, and there's certain literary techniques that are used in writing the Bible. So if we know what those techniques are, helps us understand what point God is making. One of these literary techniques is called keywords. You find keywords in the text and they're repeated. So when you're reading it, if you see a certain word that looks important, that's repeated a few times, you got to think, what's going on here? Is there a theme that the Holy Spirit is trying to show us? And here's an example. These words, hear, listen, noise, and voice. Okay, now these words, although they might sound a bit different to us in English, in Hebrew have the same root word. Now, what we see is in 1 Samuel 15:1 it says, and Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now therefore, listen to the words of the Lord. So he tells them to listen, right? It's one of these words here. Then in verse 13, a few verses later, it says, when Samuel came to him, Saul said to him, may the Lord bless you. I have done what the Lord said. Then in verse 14, and Samuel said, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen that I hear? Can you see a theme going on here to do with stuff that you hear and that is spoken? Then in verse 19 he says, Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? And in verse 20, Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. Then we got verse 22, and Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. Verse 24, Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. So here we see there's a theme going on. We're seeing these key words being repeated. So as you're reading it, you're like, there's a theme going on which is about listening to the voice of the Lord. Now you might not spot that if you're not aware of that literary technique there. So you know that one now. I'll give you another example of using a keyword. We just looked at hear, listen, noise and voice. Now we're going to look at a word which is, there's one Hebrew root word, and from it we get be heavy, consider weighty, honor and glory. So if something's heavy, if you consider something as weighty, you think that is heavy. If you honor something, if you glory something, these are all the same thing. Now, look at this. 1 Samuel 2:29. Why then did you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel? Eli's warned by God, he's told by God, that he has honored his sons above him. Okay, now check it out. Next verse. Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promise that your house and the house of your father should go in and out before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me for those who honor, and then I've written in there, consider weighty, those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. In other words, he's saying, those who consider me as weighty, I will honor them. But those who consider me as something that's light, I will consider them light. So we've got a theme going on here about how much value, how much weight you attribute to something. Now check this out, it doesn't end there. This is why it's clever, and that's why it's good to know this technique. 1 Samuel 4:18. As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy. Whoever wrote this is very clever, because they're using the same root word here. So they're teaching you something about giving glory to God, honoring God. And here where they talk about Eli falling over on his chair, breaking his neck, and you think, well, you wouldn't die from falling off your chair. But then you're like, it's because he was so heavy. But here we're reminded of the fact that he didn't give weight to God. He didn't glorify God. And then a few verses later, verse 21, this is Eli's daughter-in-law. And she named the child, that's Eli's grandson, Ichabod, saying, the glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. So we've got the same word here again, the same root word, the glory has departed. So you've got a theme going on here. Now, next literary technique we're going to look at is called comparison. Saul and Jonathan, there's a comparison going on there. Saul hates David, Jonathan loves him. You've also got David and Uriah. You'll notice that as you read that. There's a big comparison going on between how David is and how Uriah is. We kind of looked at that a minute ago. Another technique is repetition and variation. This is where you tell a story once, and then a bit later you tell it again, and people are thinking, why are you telling the story again? But then there's one bit that's different. And then you see, the story's changed now. You might have noticed that when you're arguing with someone. You say, why'd you do that? And they tell you, you argue with them. And you say, I don't understand why you did that. And then they tell you, but then they add something in, and you're like, I see, you were lying before. And we see this happen in literature. Check this out. This is where Saul's messed up, right? 1 Samuel 15, verse 24. Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now, therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may worship the Lord. At first glance, you might think, Saul is really repentant. He wants to be right with God. He hasn't honored God. He wants to honor God now. Come on, Samuel. Give him another chance. You see the way Samuel responds, you're like, ooh, Samuel seems kind of harsh. But then you go a few verses later to verse 30, we see repetition and we see variation. Then he said, I have sinned. Yet honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me, that I may bow before the Lord your God. You see the bit that's been added in? Yeah, now he's like, honor me in front of the people. So we see this literary technique here highlights the fact that Saul wants to look good in front of the people. That's what's going on here. That's what's being brought out in the text. Not that, the poor guy, why won't someone give him a break and forgive him? Really what we're seeing is Saul saying one thing, saying, I want to be right with God. But really he's thinking, I look really bad in front of the people today. I want to look good. Come on, make me look good in front of the people. It's not true repentance. Now, another technique, analogy. Okay, where you got something that helps. I always have difficulty with explaining analogy. Let me just tell you what it is. You can probably give me a better definition. I had a definition in my head and it's dropped out. Nabal and Saul. Nabal's this guy who won't give food to David's men. David gets proper angry with him. Abigail then says something to him, and what happens then, Nabal then actually dies. He dies as a result of what happens, seems to die from shock. And because his wife actually gives food to David's men and to David. And it seems to be, what we have is a picture of how God will deal with David's enemies. So you got an analogy, okay? 1 Samuel 25:26. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. So you get a clue there. There's an analogy going on here. Verse 29, if men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. My definition for analogy hasn't come back yet. But basically, you've got the way that Abigail's talking here in this story and the way that God deals with her husband, who's an enemy of David at this time, seems to give us an idea of how God's going to deal with future enemies and how he's going to deal with Saul. Now, do you remember when we done about the 3 levels of Hebrew narrative before? Anyone remember what the first one is? Individual stories. Okay, first level of Hebrew narrative, you got your individual stories, right? Here's an example of an individual story. Eli's sons sleeping with women and behaving wickedly as priests. That's an individual story. Now you read that and you think, why is this here? If you're a person that flips open your Bible looking for the right page for today's guidance, you read that and you're like, what do I do with that? Okay. Now, by the way, I'm mainly dissing the idea of doing that for guidance. Okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that for support. You know, if you're just like, I need to read some Bible, open it up, you want to get edified. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying this is not the way that the book was written, designed to be read. So you read this story, you're like, how does this help me? Eli's sons are well dodgy, sleeping with all these different women. They're supposed to be priests. I don't know what to do with this story. Then you think about what the next level of Hebrew narrative is, which is cycles. Cycles. The next level is cycles, okay? And so you're like, okay, what cycle is this? You're finding Hebrew narrative, you've got cycles that keep reoccurring, yeah? In the book of Judges, the cycle that kept happening was the people sin, then they repent, then God delivers them. But when they sin again, they get judged, you know, other people take over their land, they repent, God delivers them. It's a cycle that keeps going on. Now, in this case, when I was looking at this story, okay, hope I got this right. This is how I understood the story. The cycle you got going on is judgment when people don't glorify God. I think you see that happen in Samuel. When people don't glorify God, they get judged. Eli's sons don't glorify God. They don't count God as weighty. They don't give him honor. They don't glorify him. Okay? Neither does Eli. Is Eli fat because he's been eating the stuff with his sons? Maybe. So they're not glorifying God, and then God esteems them lightly. You know, he despises them, he judges them. This is a cycle you actually find throughout the Bible. Then you say, okay, how does this fit into the meta-narrative? Oh, I was going to ask what the next step is. What's the next step? Meta-narrative. Scholars. Right. Now, the meta-narrative is the big picture, that God's universal plan. Now, we talked before about the meta-narrative being the fact that mankind gets messed up at Garden of Eden, and then God has a plan to save mankind. But now I'm going to add something I haven't mentioned before. I didn't really think about it too much till looking at this story about Eli's sons. God's universal plan is to be glorified by changing hearts. Yeah, he changes people's hearts under the new covenant, gives them a heart of flesh. With Jesus Christ as the high priest, okay, he gives them a high priest. These priests, Eli's sons, are wicked. Then he brings Jesus along later. This is your high priest. He's perfect. And the other part of it is judging the wicked, judging people who don't glorify God. And we see this in Romans chapter 9 as well. God is glorified by saving people, but he's also glorified by punishing people. That's the way he's glorified. Think about it, right? If you have a hard time with understanding God punishing people, God is worthy to be praised, worthy to be glorified, right? Now, if he's serious and if he's true to himself, true to his name, which is what him being righteous is, God being righteous is him being true to his name, okay? Now, if he's serious, he's real, he's honest, he says, I am worthy to be praised. You must praise me. You must give me honor. If people don't give him honor, if he just says, it's all right, then he is not being true to his name. He told you he's worthy to be praised. You don't praise him and he goes, it's all right. So he actually demonstrates his glory, the truthfulness of the fact that he desires to be worshipped and should be worshipped. He demonstrates that by judging people and saying, you held me lightly. I'm going to judge you, going to destroy you. But at the same time, he also shows great mercy, and he's glorified that way as well, where he says, I'm going to show you mercy. So he's glorified both ways. But his love, his mercy, and his wrath are all characteristics that God must not hide. If he has to hide any one of those, then there's something wrong with God. But he doesn't have to hide those things. Anyway, before we get off in that one, this is just an example of how I read one story and I'm like, how does that help me? Why is this in there? And I start looking at it and then I'm reading Romans 9 and I'm like, okay, I see how things work. God has to be glorified. And if you don't glorify him, he will judge you. And he's glorified in doing that. Okay, we've finished now, really. Do we have a couple of minutes to relook at the principles for interpreting narrative from Fee and Stewart, or should we just end there?
Yeah, do a proper job.
Okay, we've done this before. From Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart's How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. Very good book. And they give you 10 principles for interpreting narratives. First one is that it usually does not directly teach a doctrine. It usually illustrates a doctrine taught propositionally elsewhere, or taught as a statement elsewhere. That's why you need to read your New Testament at the same time. You see statements about how you should act, and that helps you understand whether David's acting right or not. Which leads on to the next bit. Narratives record what happened, not necessarily what should have happened, or what ought to happen every time. Therefore, not every narrative has an identifiable moral application. This is quite important, yeah? What people do in narratives is not necessarily a good example to us. Frequently, it's just the opposite. Don't think that David staying at home and looking at naked women is an example of what we're supposed to do. Okay, it's not. Now, most of the characters in Old Testament narratives are far from perfect, as their actions are as well. Really, God is the hero of the story, not humans. We're not always told at the end of a narrative whether what happened was good or bad. We are expected to be able to judge this on the basis of what God has taught us directly and categorically elsewhere in Scripture. We know that it was wrong for David to murder Uriah. We know that because we've already read it in the Ten Commandments. Don't kill. 7. All narratives are selective and incomplete. Not all the relevant details are always given. What does appear in the narrative is everything that the inspired author thought important for us to know. So if you read in 1 Samuel and you're like, but what about the aliens? What about UFOs and all that kind of thing? 1 Samuel was not written to answer that question. As we find in point 8, narratives are not written to answer all our theological questions. They have particular, specific, limited purposes and deal with certain issues, leaving others to be dealt with elsewhere in other ways. 9. Narratives may teach either explicitly by clearly stating something, or implicitly by clearly implying something without actually stating it. Number 10, which is really important, in the final analysis, God is the hero of all biblical narratives. It's his story. So as you read Samuel, look out for what God's doing in it. These are the sources I've used. It's just one new one to the list that we've had before, which is the Reformation Study Bible, the English Standard Version from Crossway Books. It had the best introduction to a book I've ever seen in a study Bible before. It's really good the way they laid it out. And they even mentioned some of the literary techniques that we talked about tonight. I've never seen a study Bible do that before. I don't claim to be a leading authority on study Bibles, but it's just something I haven't noticed before. So I thought I'd mention that in case anyone wanted to look at that. Let's pray. God, reading Samuel, I become more aware of how sovereign you are. And you're so in control of everything. You have a plan. I pray, God, that you would help us to submit to your ways, to recognize that we can't do anything in our own strength, to turn to you and to follow your laws, to love you, God, rather than loving ourselves or loving how we look in front of other people. I pray that as everyone reads Samuel, that you would change hearts, fill people with your Spirit, God, and teach us. We praise you, God. We thank you for your plan of salvation. Amen. Anyone got any questions? I think possibly part of the reason why David is not reliable as a king is that it's actually teaching the people that a king is not the answer. Yeah, they had Moses lead them, and then Moses died, and even under Moses there was much rebellion. Then they had the judges, and you found that didn't really work. So then the next question is, will a king be the answer? And David, even though David is considered a great king, at the same time you see in David's life that even he is not the ideal. So it all points to Jesus eventually, because in the end we have Jesus come, and Jesus is our king. He's also our high priest. So Jesus fulfills these roles that no human has been able to fulfill.